All right. It looks like everybody's getting logged in, and we will go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the INDOT and Industry Preseason Update. I'm Katie Allison with the Indiana Mineral Aggregates Association, and we are here either for CAPP renewal or for HMA updates, whichever one best fits you. I just have a couple of things to go over before we get started and get everybody some information ahead of time, but please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, or use the chat function to let us know if there's anything, any questions, or if you have any particular issues that you need addressed. So first to address is the IMAA antitrust policy. I just want to make everybody that's on the webinar this morning aware of that. There will be no discussion of prices or rates or production capacities or any sort of market procedures that go along with that. Anybody who's been to any of our meetings is very familiar with our antitrust policy. Next, there will be a question and answer section at the end of each of these different sections. We have 3 sections for you today. There's the aggregate update first with Matt Beeson, with Q&A after that. Then there will be a failed materials committee presentation with a Q&A after that. And then HMA updates with Jason from INDOT with Q&A after that. So please feel free as the presentation is going along. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on your screen to ask any questions of the panelists. We will update as we go and answer those questions at the end of each section, as well as in the chat function. We'll be monitoring that as well if there are any questions that pop up there. Lastly, if you are here for your CAPP renewal, your login counts towards your attendance for your CAPP renewal. You do not have to do anything else. You are here, you are watching, and we are making note of that and recording that. We'll get a list over to INDOT to make sure everybody gets credit for their CAPP renewal. If you have more than one person watching on the same screen under one login, there will be a SurveyMonkey form at the end of the presentation. You can follow that link and fill out the names of people who are watching with you that also need credit for their CAPP renewal. Or there will be a follow-up email to everybody that logged in today that will also have that same link to that form that you can fill out for anybody who may be watching with you on the same screen under one login. Or it will also be posted with the recording afterwards as well if you miss either of those 2 options, to be able to let us know who else was watching with you. And then finally, the recording of this entire webinar, both the aggregates updates and the HMA updates, will be posted shortly after the webinar or after this meeting with a quiz for the CAPP renewal. So you will have to watch the aggregate update portion and then fill out the quiz to get credit for CAPP renewal if you are not on the current webinar or you did not attend any of the in-person meetings that we held back in March. So I think that's everything that covers for the CAPP renewal and our little housekeeping things that we have going on this morning. I'd now like to introduce Calvin Lee from the Indiana Mineral Aggregates Association to get us kicked off with our first presentation.
Thank you, Katie. Sounds like you got it all in there. Good morning, everyone. As Katie mentioned, I'm Calvin Lee, the Executive Director of the Indiana Mineral Aggregates Association. Happy to be a part of this webinar today. I'll mention that, we had 3 regional meetings around the state that were in person this year, as opposed to it being a webinar or Zoom meeting as we've had in the past. And it was very nice to get back together and see everyone and get a chance to shake some hands and just check on how everyone is doing across the state. My purpose today is just to welcome you all to the program today, and also just share a little bit about IMAA and what's going on there I think you recognize the fact that this meeting today is being attended by both IMAA members, members of APAI, as well as INDOT. Well, as far as IMAA is concerned, if you don't know much about our association, we've got about 42 companies that are members of our association, and I'm sure you work for one of them. And our members operate about 200 locations around the state. And the association provides services and advocacy to the aggregates industry at large. We represent the industry in the State House for legislation when there's a need for that. And then we also serve as a conduit between our national organization, National Stone and Sand Association, and other agencies around the state. So that's what the association does. There's some great opportunities for you all to benefit from the association and what the association has to offer. If you've never visited our website, I would suggest you take a moment to do that. There's some great information on our website that you can benefit from. You can also learn about our committees. We have lots of committees that our members are involved in, and they are functioning quite well. Like, for example, some of you on here today may be a part of our technical committee. Our technical committee works directly with INDOT's materials folks on specifications and other technical things associated with producing aggregates and providing them for INDOT projects. We also have our public education and information committee that gets involved with the public in many ways, advocating for the industry. In fact, we have launched recently an image campaign that is designed to benefit and improve the image of the aggregate industry. We want folks to recognize that there's way more to being a part of the aggregate industry than just recognizing it as a dusty, dirty environment where we're pounding big rocks and making them into small rocks. There's a lot of great careers, a lot of family businesses. So there's some, we're looking to advocate to the legislators, the public, and even future candidates to work in our industry, to let them know that, hey, this is a great place. And even on our website, if you go there, there's a video that we've produced that really explains the whole thing that I'm talking about today, and that's improving our image. Also, I want to make you aware of a couple events that we have coming up in the near future. On May 24th, we're having our second clay shoot. Last year, when in the absence of a summer meeting, we decided to take a page out of APAI's book and have our own clay shoot, and it was a great success. We had members who came to that event that's never been to any of our other events. You know, we normally have our golf outing in September, and that brings a lot of folks out, but this one was even attended with different members, and they said, well, let's do it again. So we're going to do it again on May 24th. If you haven't already signed up, feel free to go to the website and monitor your emails. There'll be updates coming out on that. And then also in July, we're having a joint summer meeting with APAI on July 15th, 16th. We're going to South Bend. The planning is already underway. We have some exciting things planned for our attendees. So if you haven't signed up for that, look for the registration opening real soon on that. So with that being said, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a IMAA commercial of sort and just welcome you to the program today. So now I will turn it over to Katie, and we'll get started with the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. All right, our first presentation is the aggregate update. Unfortunately, Matt Beeson ended up with a conflict today, and he did send a couple of recordings over. So that is what we will be watching today.
All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Beeson, Director, Division Materials and Tests with INDOT. You can see there on the screen, this is the aggregate portion of our regional meeting. We had 3 regional meetings that were held in March. If you're watching this today, you were likely unable to make one of those meetings, so I'm glad you're able to watch today. For those of you that are CAPP technicians, the regional meeting satisfies your recertification requirement for another year, and I hope to share with you today some of the changes, some new things that we're looking at in the world of aggregate materials at INDOT. So I'll talk about some specification changes, some changes to some Indiana test methods, and then some future updates, things we're looking at to move forward. All right, so initially there's a couple of things that are fairly minor. Those of you that have been around a little while might remember the Blue Book. It used to be called, it was formerly the Inspection and Sampling Procedures for Fine and Coarse Aggregate Manual. We, over the past few years, decided that there was a lot of redundancy between what was in the CAPP manual and the old Blue Book. So we sunset the Blue Book. It's no longer updated by us because all the information that was in that was also in the CAPP manual. We had one last place to change that reference, which was in section 917. That was done last January. In February, this might not be of big interest to a lot of folks that are watching, but we do have now what we call a recurring special provision rather than a unique special provision for our QC/QA soils. That's something we've been working on with our geotech division for the past 10 or 12 years. It's gone very well, and we are rolling that more into our standard specifications. There's one additional fairly minor update related to slag materials and B-Borrow. And B-Borrow made a change to not allow the use of those slag materials if it's being used within 2 feet of the free water level due to concerns with leaching. Okay, so those were a few I'd say fairly minor changes that were made. But one of the biggest things that happened aggregate spec related over the past year was actually a change that happened and then unhappened. And that's related to the tarantula curve. So if you've seen me talk over the past couple of years, you've probably seen me talk about optimized concrete aggregate, aka the tarantula curve. And for those of you that don't know, if you've never seen this, it is called tarantula because the graph here looks like a spider. So the key to notice when we're looking at this, so the idea is you have a concrete gradation for a proposed mix, and you could plot it within this curve. If it's within the curve, then it's considered to be optimized. The key to note here, though, is it's in percent retained, and it's on each individual sieve. So there's a couple differences we have to kind of wrap our head around. We're used to looking at percent passing or maybe cumulative percent passing. So I just want you to know when we're talking about tarantula, we are talking about percent retained. And so we've been talking about INDOT has been talking about this with industry for at least the last 6 or 7 years, and probably the last 4 or 5 fairly seriously on how to get this optimized. So the concept is very similar to what has been done in asphalt for many years with the concept of VMA, and it's all about packing aggregates. And you can see here on the screen, if you have single size, poorly graded versus well graded, the idea is to minimize the space between those orange aggregates there. So with a single size aggregate, you have a lot of space in between that requires more paste, more cement in the case of concrete. And there's ways to improve by looking at the gradation to improve that that packing and it has a lot of benefits, not just reducing paste content, but also improving workability and durability. This is a real world example right here of a core taken from one of our interstates that was not optimized. You can see there on the screen, that's where that particular mix would have come out on the tarantula curve. And so it was not optimized. Kind of the intermediate size there had too much percent retained. And that's actually what happened. And this wasn't the only core this happened. The surface didn't close behind the paver, poor consolidation, led to segregation. And so now we're left with the material that has these voids going down throughout the pavement due to workability, and it's going to end up being a long-term durability issue. So all of that being said, there's benefits to optimization. It can avoid situations like on the last screen, among others. And it hasn't been as simple as just flipping a switch and changing the spec, though. So, in conjunction with the aggregate industry, working with IMAA and the concrete industries, a lot of discussion ensued as to the best way to implement this. That would we change the aggregate gradations that are in the spec, or change the requirements for a concrete plant to meet? We ultimately came to a kind of a middle ground proposal that would allow aggregate producers, to submit a gradation for approval that could be used in concrete. And so in January 21, we made a change to the spec to require optimized concrete mix design in all concrete applications, which is, if you're familiar with our spec book, 501, 502, 506, 702, and anything else that references that. So it was intended to be implemented September of 21. You've heard me talking a lot about supposed to and intended to, and probably giving away the answer here, but short answer is it didn't happen as planned. So what happened? Well, so along the way, there was a lot of discussion over if we need a different gradation of eights, so to speak, of our coarse aggregate for concrete. Is this going to be for all concrete? Is it going to apply to non-INDOT concrete? A lot of the industry, the concrete industry folks, had indicated they would prefer to use one aggregate for all their work that they do, one coarse aggregate like they do now, whether or not it's INDOT or private or commercial or whatever. And so that was one of the goals. And what happened over the course of the spring and summer, early summer of 2021, was the concrete industry said, well, hey, on second thought, we're still going to ask the producers to make standard eights for their private work. Ended up potentially with a lot of situations of having multiple piles of aggregate, which was not ideal. There was a cost increase, which we knew about, that there would be a potential cost increase to the optimized aggregate that were proposed. One of the other deal breakers was pumping. One of the ways we opened up the procedure to have more optimized aggregate was a larger than 1 inch top size, which hasn't been, which eights did not allow. So when some of those gradations were submitted, there was quite a bit of plus 1 inch material included. And the pumping contractors said, hey, wait a minute, this is going to really decrease the efficiency of their pumping operation. And so with all that being said, we felt the best thing to do was to roll it back. And it is now optional to use optimized gradation per the tarantula curve in 506, 702, essentially a lot of things produced by a ready mix plant, miscellaneous concrete, structural concrete, etc. And then it's also optional if for 502. So it's required still for 501 mainline concrete paving. Honestly, that is not a lot of those contractors have already taken advantage of using an optimized gradation anyway, and they are okay with the larger top size material. So right now it's optional, and that's what we're going to move forward with. So what we made the change was actually ITM 226, which I haven't talked about yet, but that was defined by the new spec, and it's where the coarse aggregate requirements for concrete are now included. So as I mentioned on the last slide, 501 still requires a optimized gradation, and if it's the other ones, You could choose to be optimized voluntarily, or it could be the standard INDOT 8, or we added this in here, a AASHTO or ASTM number 57. Many years ago, it's interesting to go back into history. We allowed AASHTO 57s in the spec up until sometime in the late 70s or early 80s. So we did at one point. We went to the 8, my understanding, to combat decracking at the time. But anyway, some of those gradations will I believe 8s and 57s have a bit of a crossover there. But this might be beneficial to some of you that are near our border other states and maybe have had to maintain 2 different gradations. We're now allowing this as an option. So moving forward with Tarantula, we're still interested in getting it in the spec as much as we can. Right now, we're going to learn to see how many concrete mixes come in with the use of it voluntarily, whether that's through the use of a different aggregate, coarse aggregate gradation, or blended with a intermediate aggregate like a pea gravel. And so really this year, 2022, we're going to use to monitor and reset in the fall moving forward and see what we can do to continue and try to get as many mixes as we can optimized in Indiana. All right, a few other ITM changes here to talk about. The first one is ITM 210, which is our AP aggregate test method for getting our AP aggregates approved. This is really I guess it's not editorial, but it is one that's just for clarification. We never had a slump requirement in the mix design parameters there for the concrete, and we have added that just for clarification so everyone knows what the slump of the concrete is going to be when we're making the beams for testing. ITM 211, the CAPP program, inactive status, we added some clarification, added and clarified some language. So previously, a producer had to request inactive status. We added a statement that if for 3 years producer has not produced or shipped any material, then the Division of Materials and Tests may notify and place the source in inactive status. This is just to get some of these cleaned up that haven't shipped anything for years and move them to inactive. Of course, they can always request to go back active if they start producing again. All right, ITM 224, which is flakiness index. We did add a couple of things. Another sieve was added that was not referenced. It was referenced in the ASTM E11. Is different than the number 4 sieve. They're very similar, but different. So we added that. And probably the bigger change is having 2 specimens rather than 1. Concern was we had to do a gradation. We'd run the test, and then we do another gradation. That if we have an aggregate that's prone to degradation, that could skew the results. So the idea is we're going to reduce 2 samples, do a gradation on the one of them, then on the second one, don't do the gradation first, run the test, and then you do the gradation. So it's intended so each one only has the gradation done once rather than having it done twice, and also added some revisions to the worksheet for clarity. ITM 902, this is one of these examples I like to tell people, if you see something that looks confusing or not right, please let us know. We try to do our best of reviewing and taking a look at everything that we put out, but we don't always catch everything, or don't always. Sometimes when you make an edit, it makes sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to somebody that wasn't in the room when we were discussing the edits. And this is one of those cases. A couple of years ago, we made some edits to the appendix here in ITM 902. ITM 902 is verifying sieves, and we updated the workbook. It was pointed out to us last fall that there was some confusion. So we had 2 different things that said X and Y. We have X and Y as far as where you see now where it says 1s and 2s, we had those as X's and Y's. And then also we need to make the measurement X and Y of each sieve opening. So we changed that. So now we have field 1, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sieve openings. Field 2, which is 5 additional sieve openings going the other way. Each one of those has an X and Y dimension. So that's what we really want to measure, and it needs to get recorded in that table. We added some more clarity in the language there. We need to average the X, average the Y, and then some language pulled down from the actual ITM about if the sieve will pass or fail. So really all just for clarity, but there was, again, a user that noticed this and said, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, and they were right. Okay, some additional future topics. One of them is modified course aggregate number 53, and this was a submission that came in from the IMAA a couple of years ago now. I have to admit this one got eaten by COVID just a bit. I'm sure a lot of you things that got sent right around the beginning of a lot of things that have happened the past couple of years kind of went by the wayside with a lot of things in life, and I had to get caught back up to it. So a couple of years ago, IMAA submitted the idea to split the current gradation into two. This is a current gradation for our number 53s. You can see there on the right of your screen, straight from the spec book. And then what was submitted as an idea was this type 1 and type 2. So two different issues. One of them is, and again, this I'm glad when folks bring things up that I was not, aware of, and a lot of producers, especially stone producers, making 53s, have to blend some cleaner material, natural sand or whatever, to meet the 5 to 10 gradation requirement on the number 200 sieve. So that's part one. Part two, separately from all of this, I was in a discussion with some contractors, or prime contractors, talking about 53's compaction, and they said, hey, it would be a lot easier to get the compaction you're talking about if we had just a little more fines in this, a little higher than that 10%. And it's like, well, hey, when a good idea comes together. So we took a little time, our geotech and our pavement group reviewed, don't really see any issues with having the slightly higher fines of the proposals 5 to 13%. And so we're on paper looking at moving forward. The other type 2 or 53's type 2 there is proposed for drainage type material. So having two, one for impermeables, kind of when stability is needed, and one for having a drainage layer. So right now what we're looking at, better defined material usage, easier to produce, and better constructability in the field. I got ahead of myself there from that slide, but what do we do now? We've confirmed it's valid on paper, and we're looking for some volunteers to pilot it. We already have one volunteer. We're going to work with them here coming soon to place some of this on a job, and that's really that's really what we're looking for this upcoming year is some folks that would like to produce that probably the gradation that has a slightly higher fines, coordinate with an existing project, and really just see if there's anything we've missed in the field. As of right now, though, it looks like it's probably a win-win for everybody. If everything goes well, with a couple of pilots that we're able to try, I could see moving fairly quickly getting these changes into the standard specs. It was pointed out to me at one of the meetings in person after the meeting that what's old is new again, and apparently the gradation that's been proposed is something very similar to the gradation we used to use back in the 70s or maybe even the 80s. So sometimes things come around, good ideas come back around again. All right, PRA materials, where are we? So you may have heard me talk recently on PRA, and that's our polish resistant aggregate program. Our current process right now is one where we have a two-part. Part one is validation on British polishing machine. That can be time consuming, and then the real time consuming part is a test strip and expensive. So that's how it is now. To get a PRA material approved is at least 2 years, usually about 3 by the time everything is said and done. And it's based on one project. And so from our perspective, INDOT's perspective, it's a snapshot in time on one project, and it needs to beat an existing PRA that may not always be the best measure of the aggregate's performance for polish resistance. So a couple of concerns about that. And I've asked the question, can we use what's used in our ITM 221 approval process, which is what you see there, part of what you see there, the dynamic friction tester. So ITM 221 was developed about 8 or 10 years ago now through a research project to approve high friction aggregates, equivalent to steel slag essentially. And we have a few of those around the state, but that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do is take the same concept that's used in that approval process using this dynamic friction tester and use that to approve polish resistant aggregate. So what you see here is called a 3-wheel polishing machine. On the left is we make up some asphalt samples and put them on a mold and use plaster of Paris, and it levels it out, and we can measure. We can use that. And what you see on the right is a diagram of a 3-wheel polishing machine. The wheels go around and around 300,000 times, polishing a track in there. And afterwards, you can't see it. But underneath there's some pads, and this rotates very quickly. It's called and you drop it, and it measures the friction or lack thereof on the asphalt material. So it's called this is the dynamic friction tester. So what are the issues? So we think this can tell us some good things about the friction resistance, but what's our confidence? Can the test discern between good and poor aggregates? When we did this initially, did a lot of the research using this piece of equipment, we typically only test aggregates that we think are going to perform well. So we need to test some that we think are going to perform poorly to make sure it can really differentiate between those. What mix design should be used. Currently, a cookbook mix design is being used, and then who's going to make and test the samples. Currently, the equipment here in Indiana is operated by the North Central Superpave Center and IESA. INDOT Materials and Tests is looking into getting some of the equipment. We don't have it yet, but as of right now, there is a fee that has to be paid to IESA every time the testing is done. So if Materials and Tests gets the equipment, then we could do that in-house without any additional fee. So that's something we're looking at doing, but procurement right now, what you're seeing there on the screen is made in Japan and has to be sourced from Japan. And it's been fairly difficult to to say the least, I think, to get some of that stuff right now. So, okay, one additional thing we're reviewing with ITM 210, especially with some of the changes, I believe, to the 57s I was just showing you. When we're doing AP testing, we're going to sample whatever you're wanting to, whatever specific gradation it is, product, I should say, it is that you're wanting to get approved for AP. But when we actually make the beams, we have a standard gradation. So for those of you that don't know, it is a specified gradation that's in ITM 210 that's unrelated to the gradation, the product you're making. The issue with that is we're having a hard time with the number of bags we normally get of having enough material. So we're having to get more bags. So we're currently reviewing a different gradation that Illinois uses to see if maybe that would relieve some of our issues with that. So that's ongoing. Don't really have anything else to report on that right now. And with that, I think we'll open this up for questions. So please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right. So I did not see any questions that came through in either the Q&A or the chat. We'll take just a minute here before we move on to the next presentation to see if anybody does have any questions. If there's anything that any of our panelists would like to share that maybe was brought up at some of the regional meetings that were held. We have Jim, Krista, and Bart online with us this morning that can either help answer questions, or if there's some information that was maybe shared during one of the regional meetings that they would like to mention, we'd be more than happy to do that right at this moment. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the Q&A for the aggregates updates right at this time. But please feel free, again, if there's anything that comes to mind as the next presentation is up, put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A, and we will get back with you or answer it at the end of the next section. So this next section is the Field Materials Committee presentation from Matt Beeson again. And once again, he sent us a recording of this presentation. So if you have any questions, same thing, chat or Q&A, and we will follow up at the end of this presentation.
All right. Welcome again, everyone. Again, I'm Matt Beeson, Director, Division of Materials and Tests, and I'd like to present on the Field Materials Committee. So this presentation actually was one which I was going to give at the IMAA Winter Workshops that did not work out. However, I did give it at each of the 3 regional meetings. This does not just apply to aggregates or asphalt, but is a general update and introduction to the Failed Materials Committee. So, my slides are advanced here. All right, so Failed Materials Committee. It sounds, if you don't know what it is, I guess it sounds like something you don't want to be a part of. If you've had a failed material, that sounds like a bad day. But there is a process to it, and a lot of folks over the years have wondered how it worked. And today I'm going to try to pull back the curtain a little bit to show you, just talk about it, who's on the committee, how it works, and the intended workflow. So in the spec, if you look at our spec book, standard specs, there's a lot of different sections. For those of you familiar, the 400 section is asphalt, and 500 is concrete, and a lot of the aggregate things can be found in the 900 section. Well, the 100 section is a lot of our contractual and legal information. One of those things, if you really want to fall asleep, then read the 100 section. But this is where our Failed Materials Committee is mentioned, and additional discussion of what a failed material is can be found there too. So I'm not going to read this to you, but that is where in our spec book the Failed Materials Committee is defined. And so a little bit of the history of it. Many years ago, prior to 2010, and many years before that, the chairman was the chief engineer, and then there were 3 members. The members changed over the years, but regular monthly meetings continued on, were held. And then around 2010, for efficiency, the committee moved away from having regular monthly in-person meetings where all of these folks had to attend. So committee business was handled via email. So if there was a failure that came in, and just talk about it via email, maybe a phone call, and emails and letters would fly. And it was much more efficient, but collaboration was muted. We didn't have as robust of a internal collaboration with INDOT, appeal hearings, that sort of thing. And so a few years ago, we started talking about it a few years ago, and finally 2 years ago, we decided to reform the committee, resume monthly meetings, and get back to collaborating internally again. So we changed up the membership that had existed at the time, and I like to tell everybody, to be a member of Failed Materials Committee, your first name has to begin with J. So if any of you are aspiring out there to ever be a member, well, I hope your name starts with J. But in all seriousness, we wanted to add more broad representation from within INDOT. We did not typically have someone from asset management or from design involved. It was typically more materials and construction. So now we have representation from each of those groups. More participation from the research division, specifically Tommy Nantung is on every call. A lot of our investigations, when there is an issue, a lot of our research division and INDOT has a lot of tools that they can go out to do some forensic analysis, try to see what we actually have out there, et cetera. But we weren't communicating through research on failed materials as effectively as we could. So Tommy now is involved heavily with a lot of the meetings. So I mentioned there January 2020. You all know what happened a little later on in 2020. I'd intended on hiring a employee that would be dedicated to looking at Failed Materials Committee, and had a hiring freeze, and that kind of derailed this. But finally, in June of 2021, I was able to hire David Jacobs from Fort Wayne District, former Fort Wayne District testing engineer, to be involved with the Failed Materials Committee. His actual title is Field Investigation Engineer. But as far as FMC goes, he's the point of contact. If you happen to have a question about anything related to our Failed Materials Committee process or specific failed material, then David is your person to talk to. He schedules the meetings, he prepares the agenda, takes minutes, sends out all the FMC correspondence. So if you see an email coming out from him via FMC, it will come from him. Performs field visits, technical guidance as needed. Just as an FYI, we also have Dave assisting us with site manager and afterward project, which to the producers is not that important, but the INDOT is very important, and so he kind of has a split role there. So what should go to FMC? This question has come up. Is my particular situation something that FMC needs to review? Well, if it's material testing failure, low concrete strength, failed asphalt density, whatever the case may be, that needs to go to Failed Materials Committee, or the wrong or an unapproved material use, something that on the aggregate side of things, this tends to where we see a lot of the failures that we discussed at FMC, whether it's the raw material for structure backfill or unapproved series of ledges, something like that. But everything else, and tends to be a lot of what we call everything else, visual failures, for instance, cracking, bridge deck overlay and cracking that shows up within a month. Is this something FMC needs to look at? Or specs not followed? The curing practices weren't followed, et cetera, for concrete. So these need to come to FMC. What I've been telling everyone is maybe yes, maybe no, case by case. If something can get handled in the district between the contractor and maybe the supplier, if necessary, and INDOT, that's perfectly fine. You don't want to slow down the process with unneeded bureaucracy. But if there's something FMC can do, or more investigation needed, or a decision made via consensus, then that's something that can come to FMC. So how does it actually happen? So the failure happens, whatever the incident was on the last slide I just talked about. Information then gets collected. I mentioned here, how does Tommy fit in? I should have said, how does research fit in? But information is collected, whether it's just photos, test data, and more information about the failure. In the case of our research division, they have tools that can be sent out, whether it's the van, FWD, whatever it is. We can gather more information about the condition of that road or the bridge as it is right now. There is a pink sheet generated, and we call it a pink sheet because years ago it was pink. We have green sheets and other things too that were that way, but it's not anymore. But it's called a TD305. But that is the information gathering tool that we use internally to gather information about the failure that's sent to Dave. Dave generates a case number, a unique case number. This helps us keep. This was a new thing this last year. Helps us keep things straight. So if you see correspondence and it says case number 417, it's just an internal number that we have to make sure we're talking about the same failed material issue. A case is sent to an appropriate section, and by that I mean our asphalt section, aggregate section, concrete section, etc. And a decision is recommended, and then at the next meeting is presented to the FMC for concurrence. And once that happens, if there's concurrence, we send a letter out to the prime contractor, as well as a lot of folks at INDOT, area engineer, et cetera. And the contractor has 15 days to appeal the decision. So any contractor that appeals has the right to a hearing. We give 30 minutes. We're still doing the meetings virtually. We found it to be efficient for all involved, both INDOT and industry members. So all contractors have a right to a 30-minute appeal hearing. The chief engineer, Greg Pankow, and FMC will discuss after the appeal hearing and make a final decision, which is Greg Pankow's involved because the final letters are signed by him at that point, and then the final decision is sent out. So I do want to mention that 30 minutes, if there is more information presented or more investigation needed, we do allow additional meetings, but that's kind of the standard main initial meeting. If no other information is presented, then that's what it is. But I have been asked, is that the only meeting? Well, no. Not if the contractor supplier comes and has additional information we need to look into, then we can do another meeting past that. All right. One of the good innovations David worked on this last year was getting everything organized within Teams, and specifically OneNote. If those of you have used the Microsoft note-taking tool OneNote, you can see a screenshot right here of really he's organized all of the meetings by month, and then the cases with all the information on there. So if there's ever a question, we should be able to look it up fairly quickly. Currently, this is only available to the FMC committee itself. I think we've talked about maybe making this available to some districts. Really, I just wanted to share this. This is how we're organized, so we should be able to find any information you want about an ongoing case fairly quickly. This is a series of stats put together. So this is all of 2021, and these are actual failed materials that came to the committee, and a total number of 46. I wouldn't put too much stock into the district and how long it took. Each of those, I think some of that just has to do with the nature of the failure. You can see the majority of them are HMA. That doesn't mean that HMA is the worst. It just means that the nature of our spec is set up with more automatic things funneling through HMA. And honestly, there's a lot of hot mix asphalt that gets paved. So by nature of it, I think we have more things that come to FMC. And you can see the most common cases there. I mentioned earlier about aggregate. Probably the most common was incorrect material use for structure backfill. All right, so some areas for improvement. We're still trying to improve the district participation, district construction specifically. There was at least one failure last year where the contractor brought some things to light on the appeal call that made sense and it could have benefited from the district construction being on the call. So we're trying to get as much information and encourage them to participate. All the district construction directors are now invited to the meetings, the standing invite, so they can sit in on all the meetings if they like. Specifically, on each job, we like to invite the project engineer and the area engineer on the INDOT side to help provide information and support if claims are made, or just to make sure that everyone is represented and the failure is being represented well. One other thing we found the past year is those pink sheets I mentioned. They're not standard statewide. Different districts had different versions. So we're going to work on standardizing those forms. That's more of an internal thing. One thing that we have not done historically is have a what I'm calling an output here, but maybe a story of the failure, a story of the asset. When we do a lot of testing at the time of construction, we have knowledge of the material, whether good, bad, or otherwise, a lot of times. But when we pass things off to our asset management bunch, which is tasked with managing the asset for the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, we don't do a great job of sharing, hey, we know that we had low density over here, for instance, or a different material, and we went ahead and accepted it and with a penalty attached to it, but we expect there might be some reduced life. I'd like to get a standard format so we could share that with asset management. It could be put into our database and actually used for that purpose. And also Directive 112. So if you go online, you can find our directives on our website. And Directive 112 governs the Failed Materials Committee. However, it is not up to date. So it needs to be updated. We'll be working over the coming year to update based on everything I just showed you as far as how Failed Materials Committee operates. So with that, thank you. And please let us know if you have any questions about FMC.
All right. That's the Failed Materials Committee presentation from Matt. During that presentation, we did have one question come up in the Q&A. It was asking, will INDOT be utilizing 43s in upcoming projects? And both Jim and Bart chimed in on that with the answer that they're not aware of any projects coming up with number 43s in them, and a suggestion to reach out to your district to ask if there's any contracts with that spec coming up. So we'll take just another minute here to see if there are any additional questions that come up in the chat or in the Q&A. Be happy to answer any of them. Again, after all of this is over, we will be distributing the recording as well as any Q&A document that is generated from this to be sent out to everybody. You will all get emails with the information here in the next few days and be able to distribute that to anybody who may have missed this, especially for CAPP renewal purposes. And then we'll also have the quiz that goes along with that as well.